think China's nuclear doctrine has not changed over the past decades. It has always remained to be an effort to try to maintain a credible capability to survive a nuclear first strike and then launch nuclear retaliation. So the doctrine has remained the same, but I think China feels that its nuclear retaliation capability is coming under new threats, basically primarily from the development of new military technologies. For instance, the United States is developing and deploying advanced missile defense systems. Also, US is developing advanced conventional precision strike systems. All these new military technologies have the potential to fundamentally undermine the Chinese capability to launch nuclear retaliation. And as a result, China is making efforts to try to counter such developments by, for instance, developing road mobile nuclear missiles and by putting multiple nuclear warheads on its missiles, which are very effective for countering missile defense. Also, China is sending its nuclear weapons to be deployed at sea on nuclear ballistic missile submarines. I think all those efforts are aimed at fundamentally increasing the survivability of Chinese nuclear deterrence. Yes, actually China already deployed nuclear ballistic missile submarines. According to open source information, China already built 3 to 4 the Jing class, 094 class nuclear ballistic missile submarines, which will start conducting strategic patrols very quickly. So I think it's certain that China will deploy nuclear missiles on submarines at sea in the very soon future. Yes, that's a very good question. But before I answer your question about the differences of their nuclear strategy, I think I need to emphasize first that the primary objective of all their nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear strikes. But with that said, there are still differences among these countries regarding their nuclear strategy, which is how much additional goals do they assign to their nuclear weapons. For instance, in the case of Russia, Russia has a very capable nuclear arsenal, and Russia attaches great significance to nuclear weapons as a source of its international status and national prestige. So, given the very good quality and quantity of Russian nuclear weapons, Russia's nuclear capability is on par with that of the United States. So, nuclear weapon is one of very few areas in which Russia can still claim to be a peer competitor of the United States. So in that sense, nuclear weapons provide an important indicator of Russia's major power status. In contrast, China, I think, attaches a very limited role to its nuclear weapons. China has this so-called unconditional no first use policy, which basically means China can only use nuclear weapons to deter nuclear strikes by other countries. It cannot use nuclear weapons in response to any non-nuclear scenarios. In the case of India, I think India's nuclear strategy is actually a mixture of everything. India has a so-called no first use policy, but it has some reservations. It reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to chemical and biological strikes. And also India sees itself as a dominant power in the region. So India also attaches great importance to its nuclear weapons as an indicator of its major power status. Again, I think BRICS countries as a group actually has a lot of commonalities when it comes to non-proliferation policies, especially when compared with other countries and other groups of countries in the international community. For instance, all of the BRICS countries, they emphasize the right for countries to develop civilian nuclear energy. They oppose measures that could compromise national sovereignty and national privacy. They are not very enthusiastic about using coercive economic sanctions as a tool to advance non-proliferation objective. With that said, I do think they also have some differences regarding their non-proliferation approaches. For instance, India is a country that has not been fully incorporated into the international non-proliferation regime. India has now signed the NPT treaty, so it is not a full member of the international non-proliferation community. But in contrary, South Africa, it is the only country that once already obtained nuclear weapons, but later decided to voluntarily give up and completely eliminate its nuclear arsenal. So in that sense, South Africa is a very positive example of nuclear non-proliferation. And in the case of Brazil, Brazil is a very capable country in terms of nuclear technology. It has indigenous fuel cycle technology, and it has plans to develop nuclear-powered submarines. And also Brazil is very opposed to non-proliferation measures that can undermine a country's so-called inalienable right for peaceful nuclear technology. So in that sense, Brazil is a very important voice in the international non-proliferation regime. And finally, Russia and China, these two countries are so-called official nuclear weapon states under NPT, which means they bear an extra layer of responsibility for non-proliferation because they need to make good on their disarmament commitment under NPT in order to promote the international non-proliferation regime. And also, Russia and China are two countries who have enormous economic and political leverage which they can use to impose pressure on potential proliferating countries. On the other hand, Russia and China, because of their political ideologies and different geostrategic interests, they tend to oppose the so-called double standards embodied in some Western countries' nuclear non-proliferation policies. So all in all, I think all five countries, all five BRICS countries, they are important players in the international non-proliferation regime, but they are important in their own ways.